Good afternoon and welcome to the CRL webinar, Portico Comparison Tools for Collection Management. This is Bernie Riley, President of the Center for Research Libraries. The webinar today will be an hour, so it's beginning on the hour and we should end pretty close to the hour, the next hour. This is the second in a series of webinars that we've produced on Portico. The first one was on February 24th, Pursuing the Long Tail of Elusive Publishers. And the audio and the slides from that webinar are available on the CRL website under the event, on the event page for that particular event. Our interest in Portico stems from a number of issues. One, CRL is essentially, since its beginning, has been about the persistence of collections. CRL has long been a cooperative collection development enterprise that's developed and maintains extensive collections of primary source materials, particularly primary source materials in the form of serials and newspapers and other kinds of publications. We've done that since our founding in 1949 by building collections and maintaining them and making them available here at CRL, making them available to researchers at member institutions. A few years ago, we started getting active in the field of preservation or persistence of digital, particularly born digital resources. And as part of that activity, we did audits and certification of a number of important digital repositories that were very important to our members, like Portico and Clocks and Scholars Portal. These are operations and services that our member institutions, CRL libraries, are investing in and have a big stake in. We have recently been at the center of a number of discussions, important international discussions and national discussions on shared print and the archiving of print serials in particular. The CRL held a summit last June at the University of California, Berkeley, on shared print and print archiving efforts. We brought together the leaders of a number of those efforts to talk about where we were after about 12 years of cooperative print, shared print, and where we needed to be going. We found when we looked at the data we have that the whole entire landscape of print serials held in North American libraries is not well covered by the print archiving and print and shared print efforts. That despite the fact that a lot of time and energy and resources have been put into shared print, that we're only covering a relatively small part of the waterfront. That most titles are not archived at all. Many titles are archived but not in much depth. So we concluded that we need to think of alternative ways of ensuring the long-term accessibility of print serials. So we've started looking at Portico and Clocks as essential parts of the community infrastructure, a community strategy for the long-term accessibility of, long-term preservation and accessibility of serials. That Portico and Clocks in particular provide a coverage of a lot of titles that exist in both print and in digital. Portico and Clocks covering preserving the digital versions of those, and that coverage is going to have to cover a certain amount of the waterfront. We concluded further that because of this, that we decided we have to explore broader CRL member library support for Portico and for Clocks. So the presentation today will give you a better sense of what Portico has to offer and how Portico fits into the preservation landscape. We are just a word about format for today's presentation. The presentation, as I said, will run through the better part of the hour. We will have time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We have muted your lines because with over 70-some people registered for today's webinars, we couldn't afford to have a lot of background noise. And so we did take the liberty of silencing you all, but that won't be absolute silence, since you'll be able to use the chat function to send us questions and comments during the course of the presentation. Feel free to chat in anything at any time. If you're having trouble with the audio, that's chat worthy. And also, if you have questions that you'd like to be posed to the presenters, to the presenter later during the question and answer period, chat them in at any time. We will post the slides and the audio from this presentation on the CRL website in a few days after the webinar, so no need to take to spend too much of your energy taking notes and writing things down furiously. To start off, I'd like to introduce Kate Wittenberg, who's the Executive Director of Portico. Kate has been working with us over the past 6 months or so to develop programming, teleconference or conference call, and the webinars that we've produced and that they're engaged in today on Portico. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much, Bernie, and thanks everyone for registering and for joining us. This is really Amy Kershaw's webinar. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the agenda and give an update on where Portico is, because a lot has been happening in the last couple of years. So the agenda is a quick overview of Portico, where we are, some facts and figures. And then Amy's going to talk about the collection management aspects of Portico and particularly the tools that she's been developing with our team, both the public tools and the tools specifically for auditors, and then some more specifics about on-request facilities. And then, as Bernie said, we really want to hear from you about things that you are wondering about that we haven't covered, or if you want to ask us to go into more detail about the things that we've discussed today. So for facts and figures, and I think we need the next slide here. Thank you. We have, as I said, grown a lot. We're now up to 373 publisher participants. We have 25,000 journals. Articles are up to 55 million. Books, which the books ebook service, which was started, as you know, after the journal service, is now up to 650,000 ebooks. That has been a big growth area because the publishers have started seriously doing ebooks. It took a little while. The journals were way ahead for some time, but we're seeing a big jump in the way that publishers are taking action with getting their ebook programs up and running, and along with that has gone an increased concern for preservation of those materials. And then what we call D collections, our digital collections, we now have 157, and then as you see, 3 million something newspaper issues, books, and other items. So the archive is really huge. There's a lot going on, and of course having all of that content safely preserved is the first thing that we have to do as part of our mission. But after that, and especially in the last year, Amy and her team have been looking carefully at how we can increase the value of Portico for all of you in your day-to-day work, and what kinds of tools and services we can provide that will make it easier for you to do what you need to do in your jobs. So in addition to knowing that we have this content in Portico, we're now looking at increasing the value through the development of things that you can use day to day. And this is what Amy is going to talk about. So now I will turn things over to Amy Kershaw, the Archive Service Manager for Portico.
We can go to the next slide now. Thank you, Kate. I wanted to talk today about some of the tools we have available at Portico. And first, I want to talk a little bit about the ways I know people are using using Portico and Portico supplied data to do collection management. These are just because these are instances in which I have interacted with libraries with questions. I suppose there's probably other things that are happening too. Can we go to the next slide? So these are the set that I know people come to Portico to use our data for, including selecting titles for which to discontinue print. Some libraries jumped into the e-only world head first and went running. Others have been a little bit more cautious. So we do have some libraries I know who come and look and see if titles are in Portico before they discontinue print. I know that there are libraries who come looking at our data because they want to deaccession print runs, either completely deaccession, move off site. We have folks who come in and are trying to do analysis about their own collection, how it overlaps with Portico, in anticipation or as part of moving to a shared print repository with their peers. And so one factor they might take into consideration is the preservation of that title in Portico. We do have some auditors who come audit Portico, some librarians who come look to see what we're doing, if we're putting content into the archive as we say we should be. And then we have, I know we have folks who have come and done some analysis to try and figure out what titles they own and that they've paid for, which aren't being preserved anywhere. And so these are all activities I know that occur with Portico data. I'm going to pause at this moment just to tell you that on the CRL event webpage, I've got two handouts there. One is a list of resources. It's a 2-page PDF with just hot links and a little bit of explanation to a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here. So I'm not showing a lot of navigation. But if you go get that PDF, you can click, 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 click. It also includes references and linking out to the CRL paper repository, which is where CRL is keeping track of contents held at shared print repositories, and also the Keepers Registry, which has data about e-journal content at a variety of different preservation services. So those are all in one of the handouts, is the list of links to Portico and to those other places. The other handout is a guide to the Portico Audit Interface and Dashboard. It's a beast of a document, but if you are a Portico auditor, that might prove interesting, if not helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about Portico auditors a little bit later on. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So we're going to start out with talking about some of the public-facing tools we have at Portico. And we'll do the next slide. Not surprisingly, we have lots of lists available in what we call our information pages, but out on the www.portico.org, including some lists in HTML, some lists that you can download in Excel. You can do a sort of keyword search by title out on the public information pages. And we also have our publicly available holdings comparisons, which we will run for anybody. We're going to take a look at these one by one here. So we can go to the next page. This is my one navigation slide. We have lots of lists. So if you go to portico.org and click on who participates in Portico, you can get to see lists of our libraries and our publishers and our titles. And we can go to the next slide. Publishers, our list of publishers, this is just a list of all of the publishers in Portico. We group them on this page, and you'll see this in some other places where we group by preservation service. So we have a list of all of the publishers that participate in our e-journal preservation service. If we clicked on the e-book tab, we would see the publishers that participate in the e-book preservation service. And then the D-collection is, of course, the publishers that participate in the digital collections preservation service. And this is just a useful grouping. If we go to the next slide, each publisher has their own page out here. So all of those publisher names are hot links. I think I used APA as one of my examples throughout. They do both. They participate in Portico for both journals and books. So on this publisher page for APA, we can see their list of journal titles, We could also click over and see their list of books, and this is just out there and available. We can go to the next slide. You can also, from this publisher page, download an Excel title list of all of the journal titles just for this publisher. This is available for all of the publishers. In preparing for this, I realized that we had never put a link out here so you could download an Excel file of the books, and so we'll put that into one of our future development sprints to push that out, because we should have that link available too. But this is just an Excel file. So we're actually going to take a look at it, a version of it, in a minute. So we can go to the next page. We can also look at, if you selected to view just a list of titles, so we first navigated in here by way of publishers, then you can get an alphabetical list of all of the journals, books, and deed collections, again, separated by tab here, committed to Portico. And it's just an alpha sort list. So go to the next slide. You can download here a full list of journal titles and a full list of book titles. We're going to take a look at each. So if we go to the next slide, this is the current state of our e-journal list. So there's a couple of tabs we're not looking at now, but they have a little bit of introduction and a high-level summary about each of our publishers. And then the meat of this is a list of all of the titles committed to Portico, who their publisher is, some identifying information about them, and their current holdings. It's at this point that we're going to get not exactly interactive, because webinars are hard to make interactive, but I have a question for folks, in fact. We've been talking about changing this to be more of a KBART style spreadsheet, and I'd be interested in hearing if that would be of use to folks, if they think they'd want KBART plus this current style, or if KBART should supersede it. If you have any opinions about that, you can feel free to drop them in the chat or hold them and we can discuss them later. Okay, so that's the journal spreadsheet. If we go to the next slide, this is the book spreadsheet. Again, it's pretty unexciting. Publishers, books title, series title if we have it, author, editor, ISBN. I will comment that sometimes when you're looking at our lists of books, you will see duplicates. That's because I'd rather have folks see duplicates than accidentally exclude a book that's coming or we have. Book matching is a little tricky. ISBNs are hard to match. So if you see duplicates when you're looking at the books, just sort of keep that in mind, that could happen. I'll also warn that the book Excel is big, because at 650,000 books, it's large, and it works okay on my laptop, but we stacked my machine with CPU and memory. So if you ever need to use it and you download it and you have trouble because it's too big, please reach out, because we can figure out another way to get it to you, chunk it differently, send you a couple of different spreadsheets or something. Be happy to do that. You can answer the KBART question here too, if the book Excel would be useful as KBART rather than the current styling. Go ahead and let us know. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. There are a couple of tools that I think are the most useful. So we'll go to the next slide. One is that we do have a keyword search for titles, and this is actually something we put out specifically at the request of a librarian who is frustrated trying to find titles. And then our holdings comparisons. So if we go to the next slide, the keyword search is about what you would expect. You can search by keywords in the journal title or ISSN, or keywords in the book title or by ISBN, and just drop that into this little text box and search. So if we go to the next slide, this is a search. We've searched for the word textile in journal titles. And so instead of having to browse 25,000 titles, try and figure out if it's filed under the or not, you can look at just the list of 21 titles in Portico that have the word textile in them. So that facility is available. if we go to the next slide, the other thing that I think is really useful is that we can do a holdings comparison. And this essentially compares a title list that the library sends to us to the Portico holdings. And all we need for journals is a list of ISSN. I encourage libraries to send more data points than that, to send title, publisher, and aggregator or vendor, mostly because when you get the results back, having those data points in the Excel file that comes back can be really useful for doing further analysis, because you can pivot on them and then ask and answer questions like, okay, is all of these titles part of a single aggregation, and is that why they are or are not preserved? So having those extra data points helps, but it's not necessary for the actual comparison. All we really need is a list of ISSN. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things you'll get back in a Portico holdings comparison is a OnePage PDF. This is relatively new, so folks who've run them in the past, you've probably not seen this. But it's just a one-page PDF, shows the overlap, explains how many titles the library submitted to Portico, how many titles we have at this moment in time, what the overlap is. And so it's, a one-pager, easy to hand around. If we go to the next slide, you also get an Excel file. And it contains 3 sections. So if we go to the next slide, the first section is whatever data fields the library sent to us. So this is a for real comparison, and all the library sent us was ISSN. So we've listed the 2 data columns they gave us. If the library had given us more, then there might be 5 data columns here, one column for each data point provided. If we go to the next slide, the next bit is a little bit of general information. Right now, all we have in this section is the linking ISSN, if we could find it. So if we could find those ISSNs that the library submitted, whether or not they're in Portico, if we could find them in the linking ISSN database, then we'll provide the linking ISSN here, sort of the unique ISSN for the title. And if we go to the next slide, then we get into the meat of the results. So these are the rest of the columns out to the end are all about whether or not the title matched in Portico, and if it did match in Portico, some information about it. So we've got a yes or no column, did it match? We've got a preservation service column. At the moment, it is eJournal. We can also run in ebook comparison, but they're separate. I'm hoping that within the next 12 months or so, they'll actually be united, so a library could provide us with a mixed list of ISSN and ISBN, and we'll provide one result back, in which case the preservation service becomes more pertinent because it could be multiples or different ones. Then the Portico title, some identifying information about it, whether this particular title has post-cancellation access or perpetual access from Portico available, and then whether or not it's preserved at the moment, whether we actually have content in the archive, and the years of contact. If we go to the next slide, you'll actually see we've gotten a little bit more KBART-like in the holdings comparison. So the next set of titles are just, earliest year and volume preserved, latest year and volume preserved, and then we drop some statistics in about the number of articles preserved, number of issues, number of volumes. And then one more slide here, I think, the next slide. Yeah. The final ending columns include a URL to this journal in the Portico Audit Interface. So if you're a Portico auditor, you could click on this URL and go look at the title in the Audit Interface. The publisher that's providing this content to Portico, we have some titles that have been provided by multiple publishers, and if that were the case, they would all be listed here. Any notes we might have on it, and then the unique Portico title ID. This is probably not of too much interest to the rest of the world, but if there's a problem or a question, it can be really helpful for us. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. We can also run a holdings comparison against Portico books, We can run a holdings comparison against JSTOR archive collections and also against books at JSTOR. And these are all pretty heavily used, and so if you're looking at pulling print from shelves, this kind of analysis can sometimes be quite helpful. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. So this brings us to the Portico auditor tools. These ones are not so public. These are locked down. Each institution that participates in Portico, each library, gets to designate up to 4 librarians as auditors, and they get a username and password, and they can come in and look at content in our dashboard in our auditor interface. And it's actually, I like to call it, it's a window into the archive. It's pointed at one of our replicas. It's got everything. It's got the contents of the archive there for you to look at. If you are a Portico participant and at the end of this conversation you're desperate for an auditor account, give me a call or an email. My contact information is on here. And if we've got a slot available for your institution, we can set you up. If we don't, I can go see who the current auditors are and give you a list, and you can go negotiate amongst yourselves about who the proper 4 should be, and I'm sure we can work it out. So, okay, so let's go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So there's a set of auditor tools we're going to take a look at. The interface is pretty big, so we're not looking at quite everything. But we're going to look at the dashboard, for the publisher dashboard, title browse, what we call the completeness pages, and also search again. So if we go to the next slide, when you go to the audit interface, you have to log in. Not too exciting. On the left, we do have some really high-level statistics about, these are measurements that we are doing against ourselves. So we think that at this moment we have about 68% of the issues we think we should have preserved. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means later on, because it has a really specific kind of a meaning for us. We think we have about 67% of the books committed to us preserved. So we have 657,000 books committed, 446,000 books in the archive. And then again, the same for digital collections. This is looking at the collection as opposed to the individual item in the collection. These numbers are pretty volatile. So, for example, if our great publisher relations director signs 12 ebook publishers next week, all of a sudden we could have another 100,000 books that are committed, which of course aren't in the archive yet, and then that percentage will drop. But it gives us some watermarks to look at, so we find it useful from that perspective. So if we go to the next slide, once you log in, you have this set of tabs across the top. And so right now we're looking at the Publisher tab. I am logged in as if I am in this example, as if I'm a librarian at an institution that participates in both e-journals and e-books. If you're from an institution that participates in only e-journals, then you're going to only have the electronic journals tab, and you won't be able to see some of the book stuff. And vice versa. But for purposes of today, it looks as if we're at an institution that's participating in both preservation services. So again, we just have our list of publishers. We have some similar percentages off to the right that are really essentially the same as we had up front. We've got our sort of status flag here. That takes into account both the percentages to the right plus some other information that we think is pertinent when evaluating. You know, things like how much content we have on hand that we're having a hard time processing. That figures into our calculation of the quote-unquote status. If we go to the next slide, so now we have picked a specific publisher, and we are looking at, once we're into that specific publisher, I think, yep, APA again, I like them. We sort of have some sub-navigation here. There's an overview tab, which I'm not going to look at because I don't know that it directly impacts collection management, but you should feel free to take a look yourself. a journals tab, a books tab, and a file status report tab. Right now we're looking at the books tab. Pretty unexcited. It's a list of books committed to us by this publisher. I actually think because we're in the audit interface now, this is actually just a list of books that are actually preserved for this publisher. It's an alphabetical list with an alpha sort. There's some rules about when you get the alpha sort and when you don't. There's a little, for folks who've ever used the Portico Access interface where we deliver triggered content, this is going to look really familiar because it's built on the same software. The one big difference is that in the audit interface, we provide additional information. So things like preservation information, tree view, PMD, XML, that's for auditors only. End users wouldn't see that if they come to view triggered content. Whether you're a participant or not, you can view triggered content out in the public-facing Portico website. You can get into it and look down for all of our trigger titles. You can see down to the list of volumes and issues preserved. And then we have 3 open access titles that anyone in the world can actually come take a look at. So if you take a look, and that's one of the links in the handout, you'll see it looks pretty similar. So this is a list of books. If we go to the next slide, for journals, it's again just an alpha list of journals. We've got a little bit of holdings information on this page, just enough to give you a taste of what's going on. If we go to the next slide, that list of titles all on the left is hot links, and when you click on them, it takes you to what looks kind of like a regular journal browse page. So we've got decades and years and volumes and issues. We list them all out. If we go to the next slide, and here we're just looking at an issue table of contents. So American Psychologist, we're looking, some of the articles in it. So let's go to the next slide. I think I decided, we're going to take a look at one article. So we've gone to look at an article. We can see the PDF. If we go to the next slide, we can see the HTML rendition. So this doesn't look like APA delivered it. It's probably got similar parts, but it's not necessarily APA styling. What's happened is Portico's taken the XML file that APA provided, we've normalized it to a standard, and then we can apply the same HTML rendition to all of the preserved eJournal content because it's all using one of a couple of different standards. So this is an HTML rendition of the article. Let's go to the next slide. We've got the preservation information available. This is actually not all of our preservation information. We've got just a little bit we've pulled out to sort of give people a taste of some of what we've got going on. If you want the full thing, that PMD tab, which we're not going to look at, but if you were to click on it, it would give you the actual full preservation metadata file Portico has for this article in all its glory. And then the XML tab will give you the full XML, the normalized Portico XML version of this article. The only bit of this article that's preserved that is not accessible to our auditors is the original XML file is provided by the publisher. That is preserved, and it is preserved as part of this article, but you're not allowed to see it. So if we go to the next slide, the tree view is kind of interesting. It gives you a little look into the Portico content model. So I'm not that's a whole nother webinar. But we've got essentially the article is an archival unit, that's at AU. It can have one or more content units, which is the CU, which can have one or more functional units, which is the FU, which can each have one or more SUs or storage units, which are files. So this is a file list, all of the files in the article, and organized into the Portico content model. If we go to the next slide, we do have a compare view button up in the top right, which lets you look at 2 versions of the article side by side. So we've got the PDF on the left and the HTML on the right. We could pull up the HTML and the XML side by side if we wanted to, and so on. There is a DOI link in all of these. Up at the top in the citation information, let me rephrase that. Not all of them. Anytime a publisher has given us a DOI, there will be a DOI link up there. So you could click on that and it would open the article up at APA in another window. And you could compare and contrast that way as well if you wanted to. So if we go to the next slide, our most, what I think are probably the most useful tools in the audit interface. And we could go to the next slide. They are a multi-line title keyword search and our completeness pages. So if we go to the next slide, multi-line search is going to show up in this left-hand navigation bar, and the stuff you see in this left-hand navigation bar, like it is on the left-hand navigation bar on every page. After talking to librarians, what we heard over and over again is what they're most interested in is holdings and holdings and more holdings. So that information is on every page. If you click on the multi-line search, we'll go to the next slide. This is essentially just that title keyword search we did out on the public information pages, only now you can drop 4 or 5, 10, 100 keyword pairings or sets in. So this search is essentially going to search for any title with any journal title with the word textile in it, any journal title with the word Pullman in it, or any journal title that happens to have this ISSN. And so if we go to the next slide, we'll see we've got a limited list of results, some with the word Pullman in them, her phrase, some with the word textile in them, and then the ISSN was for the American Psychologist. So that showed up as well. So if you have a list of only 100 titles you're interested in, you could come just, 100 lines, drop a keyword from each title and get yourself a nice select list of titles to look at and not have to paw through all 25,000. So if we go to the next slide, there are completeness pages. I'm really excited about this one. And let's go to the next slide. Yep. You can get to the completeness pages from 2 places in the Portico Audit Interface. From that title browse page, you can get to them, which is what's happening on the top. So this is on the title browse. Up at the top right, there's a view completeness button. For most Portico journals, not all of them. Some of them we can't work with in this way. And then on that journals tab in the publisher, they're all along the right-hand side. Those view buttons are all to take us to the completeness page. So let's go to the next slide. What the completeness pages are is a matrix with volumes along the y-axis, issues along the x-axis, and each cell in the matrix represents an issue. How we do this is we have developed a sort of a multi-pass process. So on our first pass through the Portico content, we have software that looks at a journal title and every article in it, and then tries to predict what the publication pattern is. So in this example, it has guessed that in 1946, 1947, and 1948, we should have 12 issues in each of those. And it's made that guess because of the average number of issues we're seeing per volume in this time frame and some other bits and pieces of information. So the code does this pass to say, okay, I think we should have 12 issues, 12 issues, 12 issues, 8 issues, 8 issues, 6 issues, 6 issues. Then the code does another pass through the Portico content and says, okay, given that this is what I expect, what do I actually have? So what might be missing? And for the stuff I do have, for the issues I do have, how complete do we think they are? So one takeaway here is that these are all guesses. They are guesses made by code, so they're algorithmic guesses, but they are just guesses. The completeness analysis status is determined by looking at the average number of articles in an issue in this time frame, and also a consideration of page numbers on the articles. So if when we lay all the page numbers out end to end for an issue, if we've got more than a 2-page gap, we're going to say, oh, not sure, that's probably an incomplete issue. So we can see that for American Psychologist, and this is actually pretty typical for publishers who sent us back digitized content, it's usually really clean and pretty complete. So for American Psychologist, these back years are looking pretty complete. You know, you can see for Volume 1, Issue 7, we think we're not quite confident enough to say it's complete. I'm guessing the average is off. That 7 articles in that issue is a little unusual. We go to the next slide. This is the end of the year, and one of the things we can note here is that our predictions about the number of expected issues has changed. We now think there's only 9 issues per year in these later years. We can also see some other statuses here. So we are missing Volume 68, Issue 7. It's not in the archive. It's actually possible we might have it and it's stuck in our processing system. We're working on getting it in. But it's not in the Portico archive right now, as near as we can determine. So for most of our journals, we do have these pages, and you can go take a look at them. So if we go to the next slide, on request tools. Let's go to the next slide. So we can do a couple of things. These are 2 examples I've pulled of things that where I have recently done these kind of analyses and provided data to libraries who've requested them. And we can do this, there may be other things we can do as well. So if you have a specific project and you think Portico might have data that would help you do it, please do come talk to us, because maybe we can do something. So the 2 I'm going to talk about today are a holdings comparison beyond just Portico and the Ithaca family of services, and also reporting on more detailed completeness analysis, completeness information. So if we can go to the next slide. We can, for holdings comparisons, of course we can do your institution to Portico, but we can actually compare your institution's holdings to Portico and locks, or Portico and locks and clocks. Any of that, and those combinations are possible. And what you would get back then is a single report that says, okay, institution, you told us you had 20,000 titles. Of those, you know, this many in Portico, this many in locks, this many overlap, that type of a thing. We can also compare your institution to another institution. So if you and a peer are considering a shared print repository and you want to know where your collections overlap, so long as you can provide us with lists of ISSNs, running that kind of a comparison is pretty straightforward for us. It's the same set of tools, so we can do this pretty quickly. And then again, we can do your institution and another institution in Portico. Really, the number of combinations is only limited by whether or not there's a data source for it that is reasonably parsable, and whether or not, and the power of your computer. So if the result is, again, an Excel file, so they can get, if you add in 20 sources, they can get a little unwieldy. So we take a look at the next slide. So this is just an example of one of these sort of monster comparisons I've done recently, where we looked at Crossref and Portico and Clocks and Locks and JSTOR. And so there's just, in the results, there's a set of, it's very matrix-like again. So each of the institutions included has a column for any given title, and either that institution has it or that institution doesn't have it. So it's straight up yes or no. And then if it does, then each institution run gets their own set of columns with whatever data was provided. And if it matched, then the data is filled in, and if it didn't match, of course, for that institution, it isn't filled in. So in this particular example, we can see that the first 3 titles were in Crossref only. They weren't anywhere else. The 4th title, AAUP Bulletin, is in JSTOR. And then the 5th title was in, Crossref knew about it, but it's in Portico and Clocks, and that's it. And so in that scenario, so we've got the Crossref data, we've got the Portico data, and you can't see it, but off to the right, there's columns for clocks and locks in JSTOR, and they would be filled in or not as appropriate. So if we go to the next slide, this is something else I've done recently for a library. That is, they're looking at both stopping the purchase of print and also deaccessioning print runs. And they had a set of publishers that they picked that they were looking very closely into, in part because we talked with them earlier and said, you know, if you're considering Portico data, this set of publishers has sent us digitized print back to volume 1, issue 1, so it might be a good place to start. One of those happened to be Sage, and so we did a more detailed, we provided them with a little bit more detail using that completeness data. So again, I've just got the title here. It's a hot link back to the Portico Audit Interface, the Portico title ID, again, a little bit of holdings information, and then percentages on this complete, missing, incomplete, unknown, those completeness statuses. You'll notice, perhaps, I've introduced this concept of confirmed complete and assumed complete. We have the facility for some publishers to automatically build a URL to their issues in their website and go count the number of articles they have. We can't do it for everybody, but we can do it for some of our publishers. Sage happens to be one where we could do it for a majority, but not all of their titles. So confirmed complete means like we went to the website, the machine, you know, our code counted the number of articles they displayed, and it matches the number of articles at Portico. So like, wowzer, we really, really, really think this one is complete. You can see we still have some assumed completes, so there were still some titles where either the data didn't quite match or we couldn't build URLs. I'm guessing abstracts in social gerontology, that the URLs are a little unique, and that's why we weren't able to confirm any of them. So if something like this is useful, or some other project where you think Portico may have data that would be helpful, please come talk to us. We are doing this. This does not cost anything. We will do this for Portico participants. I will caveat that to say, I think if we got 100 in a year, it might not be manageable, but I suspect the demand isn't that high, and so long as the demand's not too crazy, we really want to try and help folks. We can go to the next slide, because I think I'm done talking, so it's discussion time. Thank you.
You are indeed. Thanks, Amy. Bernie Riley again at CRL. I think Amy did a really good job of answering a lot of the questions that have been that were submitted when people registered for the for this event. But a number of questions have come in through the chat, so I'll go through them in the remaining time that we have. One thing was Amy posed a question to the group, which is about KBART style listing of holdings. This is that Portico is thinking of providing. And she said, would that be useful, or would other formats be useful for the holdings list that Portico posed? And we got a couple of responses. One said that it'd be good if people could choose from all standard formats for rendering, and somebody else said that a little less ambitious. Maybe we said that both KBART and the Excel spreadsheet type, or the current type of listing would be useful. So there's that. A couple of the questions. Someone asked if there could be, if this could be used for specialized collection strength assessments. For example, assessment of a particular collection strength in, say, Near East or Central Asian material, or arts and humanities holdings, that kind of thing. What do you think, Amy?
That's an interesting question. So the data Portico has on title is we're not necessarily capturing subjects or LC catalog categories. I'm too far out of library school. I can't remember the phraseology, but that kind of subject categorization, that's not information Portico has any Portico database at the moment. However, if if a library knows where that data exists and it's tied to ISSN, then we probably can do something. I think it would have to be collaborative for us to try and work on that as a project. And that's certainly possible, but it's not, the actual subject classification of journals is not data Portico has in any existing database.
Good, thanks. The paper registry, we've done a couple of analysis by LC class using the data from the paper registry, but not subclass, but just class. But it doesn't get quite as granular as, say, Near East studies or Central Asian studies, that kind of thing. Is there a possibility of doing this kind of analysis to identify little held titles among peer institutions, for example?
Yeah, that's very doable. So long as you and your peers are willing to provide the data, we can compare you to each other, and you can then identify which institution. Well, between the 5 of us, we've got 12 copies of this one and only 1 copy of that. So that's very doable. And all we need to do that comparison is an Excel list of ISSN, or if you're comparing between 5 institutions, 5 Excel lists of ISSN, 1 per institution, and then we can run that through our tool pretty easily. That'll about a week turnaround on those. Holdings comparisons are mediated.
Okay. I think you answered this other question, another question that came in, which was that can groups of libraries send comparison requests? And it sounds like they can, and you do that. Yep. But is there, on those kind of things, is there a title limit for this kind of analysis?
No. What we find is that sometimes we can get lists up to 200,000. The definition of periodical is pretty loose. However, in reality, because we are really limited to ISSNs, I got to tell you, the max we get lists with the max number of ISSNs is about 60,000. Now, we've got a database because we're loading in the ISSNL data, the linking data from the ISSN folks. We load that in as sort of a base of our comparison. And there are more ISSN in there, but the max ISSN we've ever seen from a library is about 60,000. We will sometimes get title lists much longer than that, but they tend to contain a lot of government documents or documents that other kind of publications that are periodicals but don't have ISSN. So we don't have a way to compare things that don't have an ISSN on them at the moment. So I've never run into any limitations. The bigger concern is the moment at which you blow up your local Excel because we've put too many columns in, because we run 14 institutions and each sends 10 data columns. We might have to prune a little bit there on which data columns come out, but not in the total list of number of titles.
Oh, that's great. So as long as you don't blow up your Excel.
It recovers.
Yeah.
I blow it up all the time.
The Excel's still around. Probably will be around for a little while, at least.
Just restart it, try again.
Yeah, that you actually answered one of the other questions too, which was about can you match on other things besides ISSN and ISBNs? Provide something more complex.
It's a really good question. At the moment, we do not regularly. I will admit that sometimes for books, for some other projects, not for holdings comparisons, we will include sort of a stripped down version of like the title and authors where we try and pull keywords out and match on them. I would be uncomfortable. That has not been well QC'd, so I'd be uncomfortable doing that sort of externally in a holdings comparison. It would be interesting if there are libraries interested in that. That might be a really nice project to sort of partner on and think about. The other thing I'll say is that we're starting to build out a database of holdings information. So if an institution start to send us information where, hey, this ISSN also has this LCCN and this other and this DOI, we're going to capture that and hold on to it. And once one library tells about it, now that sort of title in our holdings database knows about it. And so we could conceivably build that out over time and then be able to introduce in other identifiers. But at the moment, the Portico data is, and even the JSTOR data is almost all entirely driven by ISSN.
Great, thanks. Somebody asked about what queued means. I mean, what's on average, how long does it take for a journal to go from queued to preserved? So queued means it's committed for preservation, but
yep,
right?
That's exactly right. We only really have two statuses in these holdings statements that we make: either preserved, which means we have at least one article preserved for that journal, or queued, which means we have no articles preserved for that journal. The time it takes to go from queued to preserved is highly variable. So if we sign a new publisher, our goal is to have their content, to have the tool set to run their content into the Portico archive no more than, preferably within 6 months of receiving content, but no more than a year. Now, that's going to account for a new publisher coming on. However, we have publishers who the publishers add titles all the time, right? So an existing publisher, not a new one, can add titles. So, like we had titles provided to us by publishers and said, oh, we're going to publish this. And so they told us that in 2014, and we put it in our data, and they didn't actually start publishing until 2016. So that title sat listed as queued for 2 years without much we could do about it. Sometimes we can do something about it, but sometimes we can't. So it's really hard for me to put an exact figure on what the average time is, because there's so many variables that can go into it. But I can tell you that for a new publisher signing, we do have pretty stringent goals around that, and we measure our own productivity around getting that publisher up and running in our system.
Okay, so somebody else had asked about what's the likelihood of completing a title if a title is preserved and there are gaps in holdings. What's the likelihood of completing that? And it sounds like the answer is it varies, right?
It does vary. We've started gathering this information and working with it. Right now, we're for the past year or two, what we've really concentrated on a lot is currency. So things published in 2015, 2016, get it in, confirm it's in, make sure it's good. We need to run some projects to look at some historical patterns, because when we look at some of the historical patterns, we can say, ooh, okay, publisher A, we're clearly missing content from the 1990s, it's too low, the numbers are just too low there. And so over time, we will work on filling in those big gaps and that's how we will go at it. We'll start with big gaps and then work down. How long it's going to take us to fill in any given title is difficult to answer. I will say that if folks are working on a really specific project, there are some things we may be able to do to help. So if it's actually a publisher where we can do the issue check and we have a high degree of confidence in that, we're willing to sort of run a report and ask the publisher to send missing content based solely on the report. Our problem runs in is that sometimes those guesses are still a little iffy, and we don't want to be in a position for asking publishers for stuff that never existed or they sent to us 3 years ago. So it's just it's messy, like a lot of library and cataloging stuff. It's messy, but we have every intention of filling in gaps as we go over time.
Serials are hard in general.
Yes, serials are hard. That's right.
But we knew that. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time, and we've answered most of the questions. If there are more questions, maybe we could schedule a conference call at some point later and cover more territory. But this has been really useful. It's obvious Portico provides a wealth of very granular bibliographic information, and it's obviously it's built out its repository to provide a lot of services that are useful now for collection management purposes. This is really good to know because as CRL, from CRL standpoint, we can't acquire and preserve every serial in print. So it's good to see what Portico is doing. So I thank Amy for her presentation, and Kate Wittenberg, who I mistakenly identified as Executive Director of Portico, who is actually Managing Director of Portico, for participating in today's webinar.
Hi, this is Virginia Kerr at CRL. At the end of this webinar, I want to thank you to both Amy and Kate, as Bernie mentioned, and also to remind you that of the two handouts that Amy mentioned, they are attached on the events webpage on CRL's website. The list of the tools and the dashboard guide for Portico. Just want to remind you of two upcoming CRL sponsored events: the PAN Forum on print archiving to be held during the ALA annual meeting, and also a trail informational meeting during the ALA meeting. And as always, all CRL hosted events are listed on our website, upcoming events on the events page. Just want to thank you again for attending this today, and remind you that there is a brief survey we hope that you can fill out at the end when you log out. That is extremely helpful for us in future programming. And do stay in touch with CRL through our website, through CRL Connect, and on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much.